My time isn't free, I said out loud, staring at the empty spot where my paycheck should have been. My name is Carter Dean. I'm 38 years old, a single father from Louisville, Kentucky, and for 5 years, I was a warehouse coordinator at Gordon Freight Logistics. If you've ever gotten a package with a smashed corner or a delayed due to weather sticker, there's a good chance it passed through one of our docks. I wasn't looking for a dream job. I just needed stability. After my divorce, I fought hard to keep custody of my 9-year-old son, Jeremy. That meant paying rent, groceries, child support all on time. The warehouse job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I clocked in, moved freight, scheduled trucks, and stayed late when needed. I didn't complain. That's what men like me do. We work. But then my boss started forgetting to pay me for my time while expecting me to give more of it. It started small. One Thursday, my paycheck was missing a couple of hours. I chalked it up to a system glitch. No big deal. I emailed HR, got a canned response. We'll review the discrepancy. The following week, it happened again. This time, 6 hours were gone. I stayed late both Saturday and Sunday for an urgent rush order, and it vanished like it never happened. I asked my supervisor, Mitch, about it. Yeah, we'll get it sorted, he said without looking up from his phone. You'll get comp time. When soon? I never saw those hours again. By month 3, I'd clocked 41 hours of unpaid overtime, and I had the screenshots to prove it. The warehouse used a clunky scheduling software called WorkGrid. Most of the guys just tapped in and out without thinking twice. But I started taking photos of every shift schedule I was assigned and every time card I submitted. And not just mine. I noticed a pattern. Ramon from night shift, Kara from returns, even Theo from forklift ops. They were all missing hours. It didn't make sense, unless it did. One day, Mitch pulled me into his office. Carter, you're a team player, right? He said, leaning back in his chair. We're in a rough quarter. Corporate's watching the numbers like hawks. We need people we can count on, people who won't nickel and dime the company over a couple missing hours. That's when I knew. It wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. He smiled like we'd made a deal. I nodded like I understood. Then I started building my own system. I bought a $19.99 punch clock off Amazon and set it up at home. Every day before leaving for work, I wrote down my shift schedule. I took photos of the warehouse clocks when I arrived, photos when I left. I backed everything up to a hidden folder on a USB drive I carried on my keychain. I even started recording audio during our weekly team huddles. You paranoid Theo once asked when he saw me snapping a pic of the whiteboard schedule. No, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Just prepared. Mitch started assigning me weird hours. He'd text me at 6 a.m. to come in as soon as possible and then mark my start time as 9 a.m. He'd say, don't clock in yet. Carter's system's lagging, but the logs would show I didn't start until hours later. The worst was the voluntary Sunday shift. I was told it was optional until I didn't show up one week. Monday morning, I found my locker emptied. My tools were gone. You didn't show up when the team needed you, Mitch said. Was it mandatory? Don't twist words, Carter. I stayed quiet, but I made another copy of the logs. At home, Jeremy started noticing something was wrong. I'd come home late, worn down, quieter than usual. You okay, Dad? Just tired, bud. But I wasn't just tired. I was watching my paycheck shrink while my hours grew. That's when I decided to stop playing defense. I found a quiet coffee shop after my shift one night and Googled something I never thought I'd search. Can a company legally erase your timesheets? What I found made my blood boil. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, employers are required to pay for all hours worked and cannot alter or delete time records to avoid paying overtime. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was being robbed. I called a local labor attorney the next day, a woman named Dana Farley. I remember her voice clearly calm and sharp. You're not the first, she said after I explained everything. She asked if I had documentation. I emailed her a folder named GFL Timesheet Fraud. She whistled after reviewing it. This is airtight. What happens now? Now, she said, we build a case. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in months, I had hope. The morning after I spoke with Dana, something shifted. I walked into the warehouse like it was any other day. Same boots, same hard hat, same faded company fleece, but everything felt different. Not because the work had changed, but because I had. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was documenting, and I had a plan. Every word Mitch said to me, I logged. Every schedule change, every friendly reminder that I needed to show loyalty, every time he implied I owed the company extra effort, I wrote it down. My notes weren't angry. They were clinical, like I was studying a machine and waiting for it to break itself. But Mitch, he was growing suspicious. "You've been quiet lately," he said one afternoon as we were unloading pallets in the back lot. "No complaints, no griping about schedules. You sick or something?" I shrugged, just focused. He looked at me sideways. "Focused is good. Just don't start acting like you're better than the rest of us." I nodded slowly. Wouldn't dream of it. But I was better not because I worked harder. Because I paid attention. And I wasn't alone anymore. It started with Theo. He was the first to ask the question out loud. "Have you ever noticed how your hours don't always match your pay stub?" We were standing by the vending machine on break. I looked at him carefully. "Yeah," I said. "I've noticed." "How long's that been happening to you?" he asked. "Too long." Theo sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Man, I thought I was losing it." "You're not." He looked at me again, this time with something sharper behind his eyes. Not suspicion, realization. "You're keeping records, aren't you?" "I am." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Can you show me how?" That night, I stayed after my shift and walked Theo through the process: how to pull work grid logs, how to screenshot shifts before and after edits, how to photograph the wall schedule, and compare it to actual clock-ins. It felt like teaching someone how to defuse a bomb when they didn't even know they were standing on. A week later, Kara from Returns asked me the same question. By the end of the month, 6 of us were documenting our hours independently, quietly, carefully, like we were all on the same lifeboat paddling away from a sinking ship that hadn't realized it was taking on water. I met Dana again 2 weeks later at her downtown office. Her desk was covered in color-coded folders, legal pads full of notes, and a laptop that looked like it had been running nonstop since 1999. She didn't smile when she saw me. She just said, "You've been busy." "I try." She motioned for me to sit. Then she pulled up a file on her screen. "You now have documentation from 6 employees showing a pattern of unpaid overtime, falsified time cards, and intimidation when questioned. The Department of Labor's going to love this." "Is that good?" "It's fantastic." Then she leaned forward. "But we're not done." Over the next 6 weeks, I helped build a case file that would make any HR department flinch. We pulled policy manuals, reviewed timekeeping procedures, compared promised PTO hours to actual accruals, even tracked company-wide payroll cycles to see how many times payments fell short. It was astonishing. Not just what they got away with, but how easily they did it. In a company that prided itself on transparency and teamwork, they'd built a system designed to blur responsibility. Mitch always blamed HR. HR blamed the timekeeping software. The software blamed syncing issues. And no one was ever held accountable, until now. The turning point came in March. Theo texted me at 9:43 p.m. They deleted my last 3 shifts. "I have 0 hours for this week." I called him immediately. "What happened? I worked Sunday through Tuesday. They're just gone. Like I didn't exist. You got photos of everything." Then they made a mistake. "What do you mean? They forgot how careful you've been." The next morning, I drove straight to Dana's office and showed her Theo's updated logs. She raised her eyebrows, then picked up her phone. "Time to go federal. What we're filing with the Department of Labor, and we're notifying the Wage and Hour Division." She paused. "And Carter, I want you to know something. Most people in your position wouldn't have made it this far." I swallowed. "I'm not most people." She nodded. "No, you're not." The legal wheels started turning faster than I expected. Within 10 days, the Department of Labor opened an investigation. Inspectors arrived unannounced at the warehouse with clipboards and questions. HR scrambled. Mitch stuttered. One of the payroll clerks had a full-on breakdown in the break room. It was surreal watching them react to something I'd seen coming for months. The inspectors were thorough, methodical. They asked for copies of work logs, security footage, shift schedules, and time card records going back 6 months. They interviewed staff members individually. I didn't know what the others said, but when my turn came, I told the truth. I showed up, I said, I worked the hours, I didn't get paid. I have the records. I handed them a USB drive with everything neatly labeled by date. The lead inspector, a woman named Felicia, looked me dead in the eye. "This is the most organized complaint file I've seen in 3 years. I believe in documentation." "Good," she said, "because they're gonna need it." The fallout was quiet at first. HR sent out an email about timekeeping compliance training. Mitch was transitioned to an off-site advisory role. They didn't say it, but he was gone. Then Kara got back pay for 62 missing hours. Theo got a formal apology letter and a $200 to $800 direct deposit. As for me, I got a check for over $700 plus an invitation to join the Employee Compliance Committee. I declined. I wasn't interested in fixing their system. I'd already exposed it. But here's the part no one saw coming. A few weeks later, I received a call from a national labor watchdog organization. They'd seen the case filings, reviewed Dana's reports, and wanted to know if I'd speak at a summit about wage theft in mid-sized companies. Me, a warehouse guy from Kentucky. I said yes, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted other people to know just because your boss signs your paycheck doesn't mean they own your hours. At the summit, I stood in front of a crowd of HR reps, labor attorneys, union organizers, and government investigators. I didn't use slides. I didn't wear a suit. I just told the story. How I clocked in, how my hours disappeared, how I kept receipts, how I turned my timesheets into justice. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then someone stood up and clapped. Then another, and another. I still work in logistics, but I don't work for free anymore. I never will again. Neither should you, because if they forget to pay you, you remember everything. Moral of the story. Lesson: never let anyone make you feel guilty for wanting what you earned. Your time is your labor. Your labor has value. If someone erases your hours, don't erase your voice. Document everything and don't be afraid to speak up. Perfect. Let's continue with part 3, picking up right after Carter's public exposure of the company's wrongdoing. This section will deepen his transformation, show the lingering aftermath of his stand, and explore new consequences he didn't see coming, both good and bad. After the summit, I figured things would calm down. I was wrong. For a few weeks, it felt like I was living someone else's life. The story went semi-viral after a labor journalist wrote a blog post titled, "He tracked every hour they stole." Now the company's paying millions. I wasn't mentioned by name, but people in the industry knew. The article circulated through LinkedIn like wildfire. Warehouse managers shared it with the caption, "Don't let this happen to you." Labor activists reposted it with, "This is how we fight back." Even Jeremy, my son, brought it up one night over dinner. "Dad, are you the guy in that article about the warehouse?" I paused mid-bite. "Who told you that Uncle Rick showed me?" I sighed. "Yeah, that was me." Jeremy blinked, then grinned. "Cool." But not everyone thought it was cool. A week after the article dropped, I came into work and found my locker vandalized. Markers scrawled across the door rat. Inside, someone had dumped coffee grounds all over my tools. I didn't say a word. I just cleaned it up, clocked in, and got back to work. An hour later, Theo walked by and quietly slipped a sticky note onto my desk. 4 words written in block letters. "We've got your back." That was all I needed. But the retaliation wasn't over. HR started random performance reviews. Suddenly, my forklift certification was due for reassessment. I was reassigned from coordinator to logistics associate, a fancy way of saying I was back to grunt work. No title, no shift control, just boxes. Dana called it legal but petty. "They want to make you quit," she said. "It's a classic pressure tactic. I'm not going anywhere," I told her. And I didn't. Because I knew something they didn't. In my off hours, I'd been building something of my own. Not revenge, not a lawsuit, a plan. I had started talking to workers from other warehouses, places I'd never worked, but where the story had landed. They reached out through Reddit, Discord, even anonymous emails. Some were Amazon fulfillment centers. Some were regional trucking depots. One guy worked night shift at a packaging plant in Arizona. They all said the same thing. It's happening here too. So I started helping them document their hours for free. I built a simple template, a spreadsheet with columns for scheduled time, actual time, supervisor names, and notes. I named it Time Proof, uploaded it to a private Google Drive, created a YouTube tutorial walking people through it, voice only. The video title, "They Can't Erase What You Save." It got 57,000 views in the first month. Meanwhile, back at Gordon Freight, things were crumbling. 2 more investigations opened, one in another state. Turns out we weren't the only location shaving time. Corporate tried to blame Mitch, said he acted independently. But I knew better. The patterns, the pressure, it wasn't one guy. It was policy. Eventually, they settled with the Department of Labor, $1.7 million in back pay and penalties. Across 5 locations, nearly 200 workers affected. Some people celebrated. I didn't, because I knew how many people wouldn't get justice. The ones too scared to speak up, the ones who had no records, no data, no folder of evidence, no voice. One night, about a year after I filed the complaint, I came home to find a letter in the mailbox. No return address, just my name typed neatly. Inside was a short note. You don't know me, but I got $300 because of what you did. My kid needed surgery, and that money saved us. Thank you, K.S. I read it twice. Then I sat on the porch and cried for the first time in years. These days, I don't work for Gordon Freight anymore. I left on my own terms 2 months after getting a full-time role as a compliance consultant. I help companies fix broken systems and help workers protect themselves from ones that won't. I don't wear steel-toe boots every day now, but I keep them in my closet scuffed and worn. A reminder, not of the hours I lost, but of the day I stopped giving them away for free. Reflection. Life lesson. Most people think standing up means shouting louder than everyone else. But sometimes standing up just means keeping quiet and hitting save. If you're watching this and someone's erasing your worth, start tracking, start asking questions. Because justice doesn't start in a courtroom, it starts with a timestamp. The consulting job wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or a fancy title, but it came with something I hadn't had in years' peace. I started working for a small labor compliance firm in Lexington that specialized in workplace audits and employee rights training. They hired me not because I had a law degree or a long resume, but because I had lived it. I'd seen what wage theft looked like from the inside. I knew the quiet desperation of watching hours vanish, the gut punch of knowing no one would believe you without proof. And, more importantly, I knew how to teach others to protect themselves. At first, I mostly did field assessments. I'd visit warehouses, trucking depots, industrial kitchens, places where people worked long hours with little visibility. I'd sit down with shift workers over coffee in the break room, listen to their stories, and then show them how to log their hours properly, how to recognize red flags, how to document without making noise. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Word spread. I started getting requests from across the state, then across the country. A women's shelter in Texas called to ask if I could help teach undocumented workers how to track under-the-table labor. A union rep from Ohio wanted me to speak at their safety summit. Even a group of gig workers in California invited me to join their Zoom meeting. Everywhere I went, the story was the same: hours, missing voices, ignored records lost, and a system that punished you for asking questions. I didn't think of myself as a hero. Still don't. I was just a guy with a spreadsheet and a memory like a steel trap. But some people saw it differently, and not all of them were grateful. One morning, I walked out of my apartment to find a note taped to my windshield. Plain printer paper, bold black ink. You made this mess. Stay out of our business. No signature, no address, just the echo of a threat that landed harder than it should have. I didn't call the police. I called Dana. She listened carefully, then said, "You're getting close to something they don't want exposed." I thought about it. Over the past month, I had been working with a group of warehouse employees from a privately owned logistics company in Indiana, a place known for clocking long hours, short pay, and high turnover. The owner's name had come up in several complaints. Same handwriting on company memos. Same patterns of shaving overtime, mislabeling full-time employees as independent contractors, even falsifying injury reports to avoid insurance claims. And the workers were scared, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. I couldn't ignore that, so I leaned in. I helped them gather everything: schedules, text messages, old pay stubs, voice recordings from mandatory meetings where managers explicitly said, "We don't pay OT, period." We packaged it into a file and sent it to the Indiana Department of Labor, CCing a few local news outlets for good measure. 3 weeks later, the owner announced he was retiring. The company was fined $280,000. And I got a second note on my windshield. This time it just said, "You're next." But I wasn't afraid, because by then I had something stronger than fear momentum. I started compiling a list. Every company I'd helped expose, every worker who'd gotten back pay, every dollar recovered. It became a private ritual. After each win, I'd log the number on a sticky note and add it to the wall of my office. The wall grew fast. $500 here, to $1,000 there. I seven $800 for a group of janitors at a university who'd been paid under the table and denied minimum wage. I didn't publicize it. I didn't brag. But on hard days, the days when people told me to mind my own business or called me a snitch, I'd look at that wall and remember who I was doing it for. Not for glory, not for revenge. For the kid whose mom cried when she got her first full paycheck in months. For the guy who worked 3 jobs and finally took a day off because someone believed his time mattered. For people like me. And then one day, I got a call that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Gordon Freight Logistics. The HR director, a new one, someone I didn't recognize, asked if I'd be willing to come in and advise on a culture reset. They wanted to rebuild after the lawsuits, the fines, the turnover. I almost laughed out loud. "You fired me without firing me," I said. "You cut my hours. You tried to humiliate me out the door." "That was a different administration," she said quickly. "Different leadership. We've cleaned house. We want to do better." I paused, then asked, "Are you offering me a job?" "We're offering you a seat at the table." I told her I'd think about it. That night, I sat in my kitchen drinking bad coffee and staring at the wall of sticky notes. Gordon Freight owed me more than back pay. They owed me an apology. But maybe they also needed a lesson. So I went back, not as an employee, not as a coordinator, as a consultant, one who walked the floor, asked hard questions, and made managers visibly uncomfortable. One afternoon, I stood in the break room with 6 new hires and told them flat out, if anyone ever asks you to work off the clock, say no. If they lose your hours, screenshot everything. If they threaten you, call me. And I handed each of them a card with my name and number. Later, I got called into a boardroom with 2 VPs who said my tone was upsetting people. I told them the truth doesn't care how it sounds. They didn't argue. 3 months later, I walked away for good this time with a handshake, a thank you letter, and a $12,000 bonus for policy overhaul leadership. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I needed closure. And because somewhere in that building, I knew there was another Carter. Quiet, overworked, underpaid, trying to raise a kid and hold it all together. I wanted him to know someone had come before. Someone had fought and won. When I got home, Jeremy was on the couch doing homework. He looked up and said, "You done there?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm done." "Good." He went back to his math worksheet, and I sat down next to him, tired but light. Sometimes justice doesn't come fast. Sometimes it doesn't come clean. But when it comes, it's worth every second you had to wait, every hour they tried to erase, every quiet no you said to the wrong people, and every truth you held on to when no one else would believe you. Because the price of silence is always paid in full. Eventually. Always. 6 months after I walked out of Gordon Freight for the last time, I got a phone call that I almost let go to voicemail. Blocked number. My gut said ignore it. But something in me, the same thing that told me to start saving time cards 2 years ago, said pick it up. "Hello." The voice on the other end was hesitant, young, nervous. Hi. "Is this Carter Dean speaking? My name's Alex. I work at Metrolinx Distribution over in Ohio. We heard about you, a few of us, from the spreadsheet. The one called Time Proof. That name again. I never meant for it to spread. It was a tool. A little system I made out of desperation, shared out of spite, and forgot to take credit for. But it had legs. Quiet legs. I think they're deleting hours here," Alex said, voice cracking. "A lot of them." I glanced at the clock. 6:41 p.m. I had dinner in the oven and Jeremy watching a basketball game in the other room. Tell me everything I said. That night, I listened. I asked questions. I coached him through the process, how to screenshot shift requests, how to match payroll with clock-ins, how to quietly recruit others. I sent him templates, coached him through how to track inconsistencies without tipping off managers. Within 2 weeks, 5 workers had documented consistent wage loss, and 1 had recorded a supervisor saying, "No one's paying for your smoke breaks, so we'll just dock 5 minutes from each shift." The total stolen $600 in 1 month from 5 people. But they weren't the only ones. Over the next month, it turned into 27 workers across 3 warehouses. Total wage theft documented over $84,000. When the State Labor Board got the file, the investigator told me it was the cleanest documentation they'd ever received. Most people send us emails or angry voicemails, she said. You sent us a prosecution kit. I didn't reply with pride. I replied with honesty. I've lived it. That's why I knew how to find it. Metrolink settled in arbitration, quietly. No headlines, but everyone got their money. And every manager in those 3 locations had to attend labor compliance training led by me. Again, the irony wasn't lost on me. They called me a troublemaker, a problem, a rat. Then they called me for help. And that's how it kept going. A school janitor in Missouri called me. Her supervisor was clocking her out at 3:00 even though she worked till 5. A factory worker in Alabama texted screenshots where her payroll listed her as part-time even though she worked 48 hours a week. A group of custodial staff at a nursing home in Arizona found out their paid lunch break was actually unpaid even when they were mopping floors through it. I didn't advertise, I didn't post anything public, but I always answered, not because I wanted to save the world, but because I remembered what it felt like to have no one to call, and because this wasn't just about hours anymore. It was about dignity. I started seeing patterns, the same kind of manager showing up in different uniforms, the same excuses in different accents, the same lies wrapped in company policy and budget adjustments. They called it compliance. I called it theft. And the bigger the operation, the cleaner they were at hiding it. But they weren't counting on people like us. People who documented, people who didn't flinch, people who'd seen the end of the rope and tied it back together with their bare hands. One day I opened an email from a man named Patrick who worked in New Jersey. Subject line, "You saved me." The message read, I was going to quit. Thought I was crazy. Thought maybe I just worked slow. But I used your method. Logged every shift. Compared every check. Turns out they were stealing almost $400 a month from me. I filed. Got every dollar back. And they changed the clock-in system. I didn't just get paid. I got peace. Thank you, Carter. You don't know me. But I owe you. I stared at the email for a long time. Then I opened the folder where I kept my sticky note count. The one on my office wall had grown too crowded, so I moved it to digital. I added a new line. Recovered wages. Total 400,000. I sat back in my chair. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't a viral moment. It was one worker at a time. One time card at a time. And it was working. Because truth doesn't shout. It adds up. 1 hour at a time. One receipt at a time. One voice that finally says I was there. I remember. I kept the proof. And now I'm not alone. Not anymore. By the time the wage recovery total crossed 500,000, something strange started happening. So companies began hiring me before the problem started. Not after lawsuits. Not after Department of Labor inspections. Before. An HR director from a mid-size packaging plant in Tennessee called and said, "Look, we're not perfect, but we don't want to end up in a headline. Can you come look at our practices and tell us what we're missing?" That was a first. She wasn't asking for damage control. She was asking for prevention. I went, walked the floor, spoke with the workers, reviewed their timekeeping system, and found 4 loopholes someone could exploit, even if no one had yet. She fixed all of them within 2 weeks. That's when I realized maybe the system wasn't completely broken. Maybe some people wanted to do the right thing, they just didn't know how. So I started building something bigger. A network. I called it Shift Proof, a nonprofit dedicated to educating workers, training employers, and creating public resources anyone could use. Templates, video guides, self-audit checklists. I hired Dana to help me navigate the legal side. She brought in 2 other labor attorneys who agreed to work pro bono on cases we vetted. It wasn't flashy. There were no ads, no big campaign. But word got out. We launched a private tip line. Not for public complaints, but for workers who just needed to talk. Sometimes they didn't even need advice. They just needed someone to say, "Yeah, that's illegal," or "No, you're not overreacting. That's theft." One night, I stayed on the phone for over an hour with a fast food worker from rural Mississippi. She was 16. It was her first job. They said, if I clock in before the manager arrives, I'll get written up. How long are you waiting before they get there? Usually 20 minutes, sometimes an hour. And they make you sweep while you wait. Yeah, I took a breath. That's illegal. Silence. Then she whispered, I thought so. We sent her a guide for documenting her time. She used it for 3 weeks. The district manager fired her, then got fired himself when corporate reviewed the footage and saw her clockless labor. She emailed a month later, "I used the money from the settlement to start online classes. I want to go into labor law someday. Maybe work for Shift Proof." I didn't cry, but I sat in silence for a long time, because that's what they don't tell you about impact. It doesn't show up in viral moments. It shows up in someone else's life, shifting, quietly, permanently. A few weeks after that, I got an invitation to speak at a national conference, not for labor rights this time, but for corporate compliance officers. It was held in a giant convention hall in Chicago. Fluorescent lighting, stiff suits, panels with titles like Optimizing HR Automation and Retention Through Culture Alignment. I didn't fit in until I started talking. My presentation was simple. I walked them through what it felt like to be on the floor when your hours vanished, to know you'd work the weekend only to see the paycheck come up short, to be told that's just how the system works. Then I showed them how that same system was built to obscure blame, how the glitches always leaned in one direction, how no one accidentally overpaid workers, only underpaid. Then I said flat out, "You don't need more software. You need more courage." Someone in the back of the room started clapping. I wasn't trying to be inspiring. I was trying to tell the truth. But the truth, it turns out, is contagious. After the conference, 3 different companies approached me. They wanted Shift Proof to train their HR teams on ethical timekeeping. That night, I called Dana. "I think this is getting bigger than we planned." She laughed. "You think we hired 2 more staff, updated the website, added an employer pledge section, a public promise to audit timekeeping practices, and never retaliate against whistleblowers. 70 companies signed on in the first month. Even Gordon Freight signed. The irony nearly made me spit my coffee, but I welcomed it, because when your enemy becomes your example, that's when you know you've changed the game. Eventually, we got nonprofit status and some small grants. Nothing big, nothing fancy. Just enough to keep the lines open, the files updated, the emails answered, and every time someone asked, "How did all this start?" I'd tell them the same thing. One day, I realized they were stealing from me, so I wrote it down, and I never stopped writing. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Most wage theft doesn't happen in dark alleys. It happens in bright offices through silence, policy, and delay. Most people don't fight because they think no one will believe them. And most companies get away with it because the people being stolen from are too tired to fight. But tired doesn't mean weak. Tired just means we need help. So I gave them help. And when the companies told me to shut up, I gave the people a microphone. I never set out to be a symbol, but something happens when you survive a system built to break you. You start recognizing the cracks in other people too. The ones smiling through unpaid hours, hiding exhaustion, behind jokes, brushing off injustice like it's just another part of the job. Those cracks, I saw them everywhere. And I started listening. By year 2 of Shift Proof, we weren't just helping workers track missing hours, we were tracking patterns, national trends. We noticed spikes in complaints right before quarterly earnings reports, a sudden flood of altered time cards in industries that used tip pools, supervisors manually adjusting punch-in times after a shift ended. It wasn't random, it was method. And once we had data, we had power. Dana worked with our legal team to draft our first formal white paper, The Invisible Wage Heist: How Everyday Time Theft Costs Workers Billions. We published it online, free. Within a week, it had over 100,000 downloads. Universities requested to cite it. Advocacy groups linked to it. Even a few elected officials started quoting it on social media. That's when things really changed. Not because we went viral, but because people started asking questions out loud, on the floor, in break rooms, in staff meetings. Why isn't our timekeeping system third-party verified? Why are my shifts changed after I clock out? Why do I never get paid for prep work, but it's required? The whisper network became a roar, and companies started sweating. Some tried to get ahead of it, good ones, smart ones. They implemented third-party audits, gave employees access to their raw time data, created anonymous hotlines. Others doubled down. One fast casual restaurant chain fired 8 workers in 2 weeks for attendance discrepancies, all of whom had submitted time theft reports. We helped them sue, all 8. They won. Total settlement $312,000 split among them. But the biggest case came out of California, a shipping warehouse with over 300 workers. For years, they'd been misclassifying employees as seasonal contractors to avoid paying overtime or benefits, even though they worked year-round. We got wind of it from a woman named Teresa who had stumbled onto our shift-proof spreadsheet while Googling how to prove unpaid overtime. She reached out, we listened, and then we investigated. 34 workers joined the complaint. When we filed, the company tried to bury us in legal pushback, threatened us with defamation, filed cease and desist letters, demanded names of whistleblowers. But Dana wasn't intimidated. Neither were we. We filed a class action suit. The case dragged for over a year. But when the court finally ruled, they awarded over $1.9 million in damages, back pay, and penalties. The company settled, quietly. An NDA was requested. We declined. Because this wasn't just about Teresa and the others, it was about every worker who'd been told you should be grateful to have a job. Every person who worked 2 extra hours without complaint because they were scared to seem difficult. Every teenager clocked out before cleaning. Every janitor paid as a contractor with no benefits. Every overnight crew member told clock in when the manager gets here. I didn't want revenge. I wanted records. And now we had them. One day, while reviewing another incoming tip, I got a message I'll never forget. It came from someone who only signed the email V. I used to be a manager. I altered time cards. Not because I wanted to, but because I was told to. The bonuses were tied to hours. They trained us to cut non-essential time, smoke breaks, prep work, pre-shift meetings. I quit 2 years ago. Still feel sick about it. I read your report. I'm ready to testify. We contacted her. Quietly, privately. She gave us everything. Emails, training videos, internal documents instructing middle managers how to optimize labor expense reporting without drawing attention. They used phrases like strategic windowing and efficiency coding. But it was theft, polished, sanitized, institutionalized theft. When we published that expose, redacted, anonymized, but real, something cracked open in the corporate world. Suddenly, HR departments were requesting our audit kit. Union organizers started printing our worksheets for onboarding packets. One law school invited me to guest lecture on digital wage theft. Me, a warehouse guy with no degree and a story that started with one missing paycheck. I'll never forget what Dana told me one night after we got off a video call with a group of factory workers in Wisconsin. You turned receipts into Reform Carter. I laughed. I just kept notes. No, she said. You kept going. That's the part most people don't do. She was right. Because it's not just about speaking up once. It's about staying in the room long enough to be heard. It's about staying at the table even after they change the subject. It's about outlasting the people who hoped you'd get tired. I did get tired, but I didn't stop. And now they're the ones looking over their shoulder. Now the system knows it can't just delete hours and expect no one to notice. Now the whispers are louder than ever. And I'm still listening. The invitation came wrapped in flattery. A major business news network reached out saying they were planning a segment on modern labor challenges in America. They wanted to feature different voices, economists, HR leaders, and me. They called me a worker advocate, said I'd bring authenticity to the conversation. I should have known. The moment I stepped onto the set, I could feel it. The stage wasn't neutral. I was the foil. The emotional story to balance out their polished expert panel. I was seated between a smiling corporate consultant in a $2,000 suit and a labor economist with a book deal. They introduced me last. This is Carter Dean, the host said, a former warehouse worker turned whistleblower. I smiled, polite, calm, waiting. The consultant went first. Wage issues are rarely about malice, he said, folding his hands. They're about miscommunication system inefficiencies. The economist nodded. And let's not forget many businesses operate on razor-thin margins. They can't always track every second. Then they turned to me. What do you think, Carter, is wage theft really that widespread? Or are these isolated misunderstandings? I looked at the host, then the camera, then back at the 2 suits flanking me. If I steal a soda from a gas station, that's theft. If I work 10 hours and only get paid for 9, that's... They were quiet. It's not inefficiency, I continued. It's not a glitch. It's policy. And the people losing those hours, they're not executives or consultants. They're janitors, nurses, kitchen staff, warehouse workers, people whose margins are measured in meals, not quarterly reports. The host cleared her throat. But what about unintentional mistakes? Mistakes don't happen 12 times in a row in the same direction. I interrupted. The consultant frowned. We can't vilify all businesses. I'm not, just the ones that steal. There was a pause, the kind that makes producers panic and viewers lean in. Then the economist chimed in, trying to soften the moment. Well, clearly Carter brings a valuable perspective to this issue. I looked at him. This isn't a perspective, it's a pattern. After the show aired, my inbox exploded. Half were thank you messages, the other half hate mail. Socialist, liar, get a real job. You're ruining companies with your victim stories. But one message stood out. It was short, just a few lines. I work for the network. They tried to set you up. You didn't flinch. Respect. I didn't respond. I didn't need to because I hadn't gone on that show to win an argument. I'd gone to remind people that the system doesn't get to define justice. The people living inside it do. After the broadcast, more doors opened. Some slammed shut too. 2 companies we'd been working with pulled out of our employer pledge. They didn't say why, but we knew. Visibility brings scrutiny, and scrutiny, that's expensive. But I wasn't backing down. Neither were the people standing beside me. By this point, ShiftProof had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We had a volunteer network in 22 states. Our audit checklist had been downloaded over 1 million times. Our guides were translated into Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and Haitian Creole. A tech developer, a former intern who once lost wallowed $200 in unpaid summer work, offered to build us an app. We called it Clockright. Simple, free, secure. Workers could log their time snap shift photos, store documentation, and track pay consistency. It even alerted users when their pay didn't match their hours. Within a year, it had over 400,000 users. Some companies hated it. One tried to get it delisted from app stores. Claimed it encouraged disruption. We posted their cease and desist letter on our website. The downloads doubled because you can't silence a movement that's built on silence breaking. We weren't whistleblowers anymore. We were organizers, auditors, architects of accountability. And the more they tried to erase us, the louder the truth became. I still remembered that first night I sat at my kitchen table holding a coffee cup in one hand and my pay stub in the other, whispering to myself, "This isn't right." Now millions of people were whispering the same thing and writing it down, one worker at a time, one receipt at a time, one voice that refused to stay quiet. I never imagined our little spreadsheet, the one I first built out of frustration and survival, would ever make it to Capitol Hill. But there I was, standing in front of a panel of legislators testifying under oath, the nameplate in front of me reading Carter Dean, founder of ShiftProof. I wore the only suit I owned. It didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, but I didn't care. What mattered was what I carried in my hands, a binder packed with stories, stats, pay stubs, and the voices of over 10,000 workers who had submitted verified claims through our platform. The session was titled Digital Wage Theft and Modern Labor Exploitation. A senator from Oregon asked the first question. "Mr. Dean, you've never held a law degree, you're not an economist, and you didn't come through traditional advocacy channels. What made you start this work?" I didn't pause. I was a warehouse worker. They deleted my hours. I kept records. I started helping others do the same. That's it. A few staffers smiled. The senator nodded slowly. "And you've helped recover how much in unpaid wages so far?" I flipped to the most recent page in the binder. As of this morning, $9.2 million across 31 states in back pay settlements and fines. Another senator leaned in. "And this was all if so self-initiated, yes, sir, because no one else was going to do it for us." The hearing lasted over 2 hours. We outlined the need for federal oversight on digital timekeeping systems. We presented evidence showing how wage theft disproportionately affected low-income workers, especially in minority and immigrant communities. Dana submitted a written statement that was later quoted in 3 committee reports. The most surreal moment came at the end. One of the panel chairs, a woman in her 60s who had grown up working in her parents' diner, said this, "Mr. Dean, when people talk about the American worker, they talk about grit, perseverance, quiet strength. You've reminded us that sometimes the quiet ones are keeping receipts and changing lives while we weren't paying attention." A week later, our story was featured in Time magazine. The headline, "He Fought Back with a Spreadsheet and Changed U.S. Labor Law." Congress introduced a bill called the Fair Shift Act. It proposed mandatory third-party auditing of employer timekeeping systems for companies with over 100 employees' protections against retaliation for reporting wage discrepancies and clear requirements for transparent, accessible time data for all employees. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The kind of start we used to dream about, and now we were writing into law. Back at home, things felt quieter. Jeremy had just turned 16. He got his first part-time job stocking shelves at a local pharmacy. On his first day, he came home holding the shift schedule in one hand and his phone in the other. "Hey, Dad," he said, grinning. "Want to teach me how to log my hours?" I smiled wider than I had in a long time. Later that night, he showed me a spreadsheet he'd built his own, color-coded, labeled, timestamps included. I didn't correct anything. He'd done it right. He'd watched me long enough to know how. And that's what this was always about. Not revenge, not reputation. Legacy. The idea that maybe, just maybe, if one person stands up, the next person doesn't have to stand alone. Maybe the next worker won't cry in their car after getting underpaid. Maybe the next teenager won't accept volunteer hours as a condition of employment. Maybe the next single parent won't choose between calling out theft and keeping their job, because now they know they're not imagining things, they're not wrong to ask questions, and they're not alone. Not anymore. That's the power of a pattern, the strength of a record, the truth that lives in a timestamp and a sticky note. They tried to delete our hours. We turned them into evidence. They tried to erase our voices. We turned them into law. The first time someone called me a hero, I laughed. It was a truck driver named Leo standing outside a diner in Kansas. He recognized me from a podcast I'd appeared on, shook my hand, and said, "You saved me, won $400 in unpaid OT. You're a damn hero." I told him I wasn't a hero, I was just tired of being invisible. But the truth is, the people who thanked me, they weren't really thanking me. They were thanking the idea that someone somewhere had finally made the system see them. That matters more than anything. Because the warehouse, the fast food line, the hotel laundry room, those places don't care how hard you work. Not really. They'll take your hours, your back, your knees, your youth, and they'll do it with a smile if you let them. But if you track it, if you hold them accountable, they back off. Power respects documentation. It always has. And I made sure we had documentation. Every message I ever received from a worker, I saved it. Every anonymous email, every scanned time card, every thank you text, I archived them all. I have a folder now. It's not on my desktop. It's printed. 3 heavy binders, each labeled with a different year. Inside, there are hundreds of notes. Scribbled letters from night shift janitors, typed emails from fast food managers who turned whistleblowers, transcripts from court hearings where workers finally spoke up for the first time, and scattered through those pages, thank yous. Some long, some just 2 words. One of my favorites is written in shaky handwriting on a torn napkin. "You believe me." That's all I needed. Gloria, age 62, cafeteria worker. I've read it 100 times. I never met Gloria. I probably never will, but she's why I kept going. All of them are. ShiftProof is bigger now. We have regional teams, training hubs, even corporate liaisons. We help companies build systems that work before someone like me has to show up with a folder of red flags. We train workers, managers, union reps, and even school counselors because, yes, teenagers are some of the most vulnerable when it comes to wage theft. And we keep growing. Not because we're chasing some legacy, but because as long as there's someone somewhere saying, "It's not a big deal, it's just 10 minutes, we have work to do," because 10 minutes stolen from a worker isn't a glitch, it's a choice. And every choice leaves a trail. A few months ago, I stood on a small stage at a labor justice gala. They were giving me an award. I never asked for the People's Advocate Award. Jeremy was in the front row, taller now, 17, and ready for college. He wore a suit that fit better than mine ever had. He clapped. He smiled. When they handed me the award, I didn't give a big speech, just a story about a man who worked hard, lost hours, kept quiet, then stopped keeping quiet. I told them about the first time I said no, the first time I took a photo of a schedule, the first time I realized I wasn't crazy, I was being robbed, and the first time someone else said, "Me too." I ended it with this: you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to be willing to write it down, one line at a time, until the truth becomes undeniable. They stood up, clapped. I stepped off the stage not because I'd finished, but because I knew others were just beginning. People who would take what we built and make it stronger, smarter, wider. People who would fight in different ways. People who might never know my name but would still feel what we started. A movement built not on rage, but on records. Not on slogans, but on evidence. Not on yelling, but on proving. Because some of the most powerful revolutions in history didn't begin with fire. They began with a log, a record, a timestamp, and someone whispering to themselves, "This isn't right, and I'm not crazy." Final reflection. What I learned. Don't ever let anyone convince you your time is worthless. Don't let them take your hours like they're doing you a favor. Don't let them smile while stealing from you and call it policy. You don't have to scream. You don't have to fight. You just have to watch, document, and wait. Because systems may lie, but the clock never does. And when the truth finally catches up, you'll be ready. With every hour they tried to delete right there in your hands. Because you remembered what they hoped you'd forget. You are not just your paycheck. You are your time. And your time is priceless.